Amen. All right, so we are going to start tonight this topic of world religions. Yay! So exciting. Now, one of the things.
If we get a vote on this.
Now, I know this is not as flashy as the book of Revelation. Everybody's like, oh, end times, we're so excited. We're religion's like, oh, this sounds so academic and just so, But it is an important thing for us to study. And so I hope everybody got their handout. Okay, you'll kind of follow along with that. But one of the things that why I think this is an important thing for us to study. First of all, the world is shrinking. It is getting smaller. You are having more contact with people than you ever thought you ever would. Think about this. Most of y'all, when you grew up, let's be honest, how many of y'all grew up in a small community where you just assumed everybody thought identically to what you thought and believed what you believed, and the first time you met someone who was not a Christian was when you went to school, when you went to college or something. Yeah, that's the reality. Well, one time, I'm thinking that the sheets are over here. Yeah, the one time I took a class on sociology, and the professor made this point about how we are a shrinking world, and I was going to have this, we try this, but I thought better not, but she had us all look at each other's clothes and look at the tags. And just look at the tags and see where your clothes were made. Very little of the clothes you're wearing today were made in America. Most are made in other places. And you're having more and more contact with other police, and more people are coming over to America. And so we're coming up against folks. The second reason I think is when you understand people and understand their beliefs, it gives you a sense of tolerance and peace. One of the things that you have to move past is rhetoric. I'll tell you a good example of this is that when I was in seminary, and I told you all this, that my favorite class in seminary was a class on the Protestant Reformation taught by a Catholic brother. And I was a Methodist at a Presbyterian school, so I was well covered. But one of the things he did to start off the class, he said, okay, you Protestants, and he'd always say, okay, are you still protesting? Are you ready to come back? And we'd say, no, never. But then he'd say, okay, tell me, what do you believe about the Catholic Church? What do you think the Catholic Church teaches? And we'd say, they don't believe in salvation by grace alone. They believe that he was not true. And then he said, not true. We say another thing, not true. And he said, now let me tell you what I heard as a Catholic child taught about the Protestants. That you could do whatever you want. You could be the heathen as much as you want because it didn't matter. And we said, that's not true. He said, exactly. And he said, a lot of times we talk past each other instead of talking to each other. And so one of the things is when you truly go to understand each other, you say, okay, what is it that you truly believe? What do we have in common? And how can I agree with you, disagree with you, but still love you? Okay? I don't know if y'all saw the news today, it just broke my heart about Charlie Kirk. And it's just terrible. And this is where we have to get to the point where I can look at you and say, I do not agree with what you say, but I still can see you as a human being without having to result to violence and murder. Just awful. Okay, third thing is that it helps in our evangelism. Sharing our faith with others. So how best? And throughout this whole thing, I'm going to recommend a bunch of books. The one great book is by Ravi Zacharias. It's called Jesus Among the Other Gods. And it's about how Jesus relates to other religions. And it's a way how we can share our faith with other belief systems. And so that helps. But finally, it strengthens our own belief. Here's one thing that will shock you, is that, I would say that more atheists understand the Christian faith better than most Christians do. Just because as Christians, we never truly study what we believe. If you say, why are you a Christian? Well, Mama told me, you know. And so, when you understand these beliefs, you'll look at it and say, okay, I hear what they're saying about salvation. What do I believe about salvation? Why is Christianity different from Judaism, from Islam, from Hinduism? And how do I get that? So as we go through this, we're going to study each of these major religions. We're going to study New American religious groups and cults. We'll talk about that in a moment. But tonight's lesson is going to be kind of, this is probably the most, depends on either you're excited about these things or you're not excited about these things, okay? So this is where we're going to talk about what is religion, why do we have religion? I mean, what's the point behind it? Why is it that we as humans have this idea of a God? Second, why are there so many religions? If there's one God, should there be one religion? And then third, where did it originate? Where did it come from? Okay? So let's start with this. As humans, we are strange creatures. Okay? One hand, we long for our independence. Nobody tells me what to do. Nobody tells me what to think. But at the same time, we want something bigger than ourselves. We want to belong to something greater than ourselves, a greater purpose, a greater sense of meaning. And so at one time we're both rebellious, but also we want to find a reason for something better. And that's unique among among humans. You know, you never see a chicken saying, why am I here? You know? A cow saying, why do I exist? What are those golden arches? But it's amazing how it's ingrained in us to see that there is more to our existence than just existence. I want to tell you about a report in the 1990s. Deborah Kellerman, she's a PhD director at the Child Cognition Laboratory in Boston, and she did a study on what's called theological thinking in children. And that's basically trying to discover the purpose and meaning. So when you talk about theological, it's basically the purpose is at the end, the full. So you see purpose and design in things. And so when she talked to kids, it's amazing how kids are designed when they see things to see automatically design and purpose. So like, they showed them a cup and said, what's this cup for? Drinking. Well, why is it shaped like that? Cold. And they saw there was, kids understood, okay? This, okay? And then they asked them some deeper questions. So they saw purpose and design, not just in these objects like that, but in the world itself. So, for example, they asked the kids, why are there clouds? And the clouds, they said, well, clouds exist for rain. They didn't have anything, they just understood, that's for rain. They asked kids, they said, okay, why are these rocks pointing? And most of us would say, oh yeah, well that's the way the wind blew them and da-da-da-da. The kids' response? Well, that's so that the animals won't sit on them. But the thing is, they talked to these kids, as they looked at the world around them, and even at themselves, they understood that someone made them. Someone designed them, and that there was purpose behind it. And I thought that was fascinating. So what she said, I thought this was neat. She said, she described these kids as intuitive theists, meaning that these kids, from the get-go, automatically believe in a being greater than themselves. That they already see the purpose and design everywhere. And so, while specific religious thought are taught to kids, just by being born, the kids automatically understood there's something out there. There's someone out there. There's something bigger than us that made all this and made us for a reason. And so they saw purpose and design everywhere. And when you look at the world, you can see where you can kind of see that. Why we have things the way they are. And what's interesting is I did more studying, even atheists agree that that's how the world appears to be. Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist, in his book, The Blind Watchmaker, he said, biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. But he says that that is an accident of evolution. And so he says it's just an accident. But the thing goes is that you see that when we look, we ask these questions. Why am I here? Is there someone bigger than us? Why is everything designed the way it is? And so our natural inclination is to believe. Now, as believers, we say that that's because God placed that in our hearts. Here's some scripture verses. Ecclesiastes 3:11. He has made everything beautiful in his time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men. Yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. So God has set eternity in our hearts, that we long for this, that we long to understand. Paul wrote in Acts 17, from one man he made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. And so there's this natural inclination, this natural desire for us to believe in God. And that's why it's one of those amazing things. When you study sociology and anthropology, what you find is that every culture, practically every culture, has this in common. There's some belief system, some form of religion in every culture. And so one thing we share in common as humanity is this desire to seek something bigger than us, to long to reach out for that. Okay? Now, just because that's there, to me, that helps prove the existence of God. It does not disprove the existence. It means that, to me, God designed us to be with him and to love him and be loved by him. And so that's why we are created, to have that relationship with him. And so naturally, we as humans long for that. But then sin gets in the way, and we'll talk more about that as we go through the different studies. But the idea is that it's ingrained in humanity to reach out to God. And so that leads us to religion. So, religion, is it good or is it bad? Depends on who you ask. There are some who say that religion is at the source of all the world's problems. If you can just get rid of religion, everything will be fixed. Y'all remember that song by John Lennon? Yep. Imagine there's no heaven, no religion below. You know, you think, oh, that'd be great. No, it wouldn't. Religion has done a lot of good. And not just in society, but within ourselves. When a person's religious, it gives them a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, a sense of direction, a sense of morality, a sense of something higher than themselves. It soothes us in times of grief, in times of death. So all these things come about. But how do you describe religion? Okay, here, let's just open this up. How would you describe religion? If I said define religion, what would you say?
Rules.
Rules, okay.
Beliefs.
Beliefs?
Practices.
That's good practices. Anybody else?
Overall, Jesus.
Organization, what's that?
A way to know Jesus.
A way to know Jesus, okay? Okay. Here's the thing that's funny about when you say the word religion, scholars cannot agree on a one definition. It's like trying to explain the word ball. Okay? If I said ball, you always say, well, define ball. It's a round bouncy object. Yeah, but what about a football? Football's not round, doesn't really bounce. But then also, what did Cinderella go to?
The ball.
A ball. Had a great time, right? And that tells us another thing. What do you say when you have a great time with your buds? We had a ball! And so which one's correct? Which one is wrong?
They all
They all are, yes. All of the above. And so that's how it is we try to understand religion. Try to define it. Because some would say, well, you define religion by a belief in God. Okay? Buddhism. Have you all heard about the religion Buddhism? Guess what Buddhists don't believe in?
are.
God. Yeah, they have all the different sets of a belief system, and it's one of the major religions of the world, but they don't believe in a higher power. Okay? So it's hard to define exactly what religion is. But it's kind of like, if y'all remember when there's a court case that went before the Supreme Court, and it was about pornography. Things you never thought you'd hear in church. But the judge was asked, to define what pornography is. Because someone said, well, it's a naked man. It's like it's a statue of David. Is that a pornography? He said, no. And the judge's comment, I love what he says, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And so that's kind of how we see religion. How we kind of see it. Because we say, well, it's just a set of beliefs. Okay, well then, that could be about anything. Beliefs, okay, political beliefs. That's your religion. Could fall under that. Some say, well, it's practices, codes, and all this. You know who has strict codes, strict beliefs, adheres to a set of values, and an organizational structure? The mafia.
Yeah.
Okay, so is that a religion? You say, well, it's passion, enthusiasm. There's something higher than yourself. Y'all should come to my house on Saturday mornings and watch me watch college football. Okay? So, all that being said, here is some definitions that I gathered. Jason Boyd is a theologian. He says, religion contains a structured belief system, actions of its adherents, such as ritual, deeds, and other things, and addresses the great uncertainties of human existence. So it addresses that question of, who am I, why am I here, where am I going? Okay. Yeah, searching, okay? The next one comes from Whitford Corduane. It says, religion is a system of beliefs and practices that directs a person towards transcendence and thus provides meaning and coherence to a person's life. Transcendence, that means beyond you. So something outside yourself. Now, what's interesting is that he later goes on, he later redefined his definition, and he added that it's through the means of cultists. And the word cultist is one of those theological terms. It does not mean cult. It just means outside of yourself. And so he used that term because people were saying they were not religious but spiritual. Have y'all heard that? And he said that's, first of all he says kind of a bunch of baloney. But he says religion is when you have something outside of yourself. So, like for Christians, it's Jesus. It is we study the Bible, we go to church, we have these things outside of us. And so he says you have these things outside of your existence. Okay? And so these all help us kind of define what it is. But even with that, religion can mean lots of things to lots of folks. Okay? And so, how many religions are there in this world?
30 million, 1,000.
There's about, major religions, there's about 300. Okay? and then we can break them down from that. There's subsets of other things. But people are starting new religions every day. Y'all ever watched Sanford and Son? One time, Sanford's tried to start the Church of Junk because he thought he'd get a tax write-off. And so you could just think. So it goes where it's so hard to try to find religion. Okay, now take that. How do we separate a religion from a cult? Okay, what separates that? Because a lot of the same things that you would define a religion as, you can also define a cult as. Now, I'm going to give you one big key to start off with. If your leader looks like that, it's a cult. Okay? Always look the eyes, okay? Always look the eyes. But one of the things that we would look at, some would like to clarify a cult as anything that is extra biblical from the historic Orthodox Christianity. So anything where the beliefs differ from what is commonly held by that belief system, they would find that as a cult. Okay? Let me give you what one author wrote. He said that it is a belief system that differs from normal expressions of the religion and its culture, a misinterpretation of primary text, or additions of extra biblical writings. Okay? So, for example, the Book of Mormon, Mormonism. It is, if you study it, it is far different from Christianity. Okay, the belief systems, how they define terms, it doesn't go along with what Orthodox Christianity says. But would you put it in the same category as this guy? Okay? So it's one of the things we're like, no. So the term that we're going to use for groups like Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormonism and all this is what we call New American Religious Groups. So when we get to those issues, we're going to learn that the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and all these other groups, they all started at the same time in the same area. And you're like, wait a minute, what was going on in Upper New York when all this happened? There's a reason for it. We'll talk more about that. But cults, this is how we're going to find cult. A dogmatic system has nothing to do with puppies. This means you have to believe this. A dogmatic system that requires absolute faith and adherence to a supernatural authority who received an original revelation, and then to those who have transposed it, and to those who have been passed down. In other words, are you allowed to question your beliefs? Are you allowed to disagree with someone? Or do they demand you have to do everything I say when I say it, and don't ever deviate from that? If you're in a place like that, that's a cult. Churches can easily become cults. And they often follow a charismatic leader. We're going to learn more about cults. So y'all heard about Jim Jones, okay, and all this, and how these things, in fact, y'all know well about how easily a church can become a cult just down our road in Waco. You know, the Branch Davidians. Talk about them. And so that's how we're going to define these, okay? So, first of all, let me ask, do y'all have any questions about religion itself? Now, we're going to look at why we have so many religions, but what about religion, about our need for religion? It's been said that even if you say you don't worship something, you're always going to worship something or someone, okay? You're always going to have someone on the throne of your life, okay? And so oftentimes, if it's not a God, it's going to be a political system, it's going to be an ideology, it's going to be something that you can grasp onto, a greater meaning. Okay, so let's look at this. Why are there so many religions? Okay? It's amazing, you look at it, they kind of all share similar things. So there's beliefs, there are practices, there are rituals, there are morals, there are sacred texts. One author said that religion is a lot like fashion, in that everybody wears different styles. You got people wear bell bottoms, people wear short pants, people wear, flashy, shiny stuff, people wear turbans. They all wear different clothes, but guess what they're all wearing? Clothes. And so he said religion is a lot like that we all have different clothes, but just different styles. But there's more to it than that. But you'll find some commonalities amongst religions. For example, have you all heard of the Golden Rule? What is it? Okay.
Before they do it, should you?
I
thought it was he who has to go.
He has to go, makes the rule.
He has the golden rules. All right. So, let me read to you different versions of the golden rule in religions. So in Christianity, this is small, I'm sorry. For some reason I thought our TV was bigger in here. So in Christianity, so in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. Okay? So, you see in Islam, the Prophet Muhammad said, none of you truly believes until he loves his brother, his love for his brother, that which he loves for himself. The Jewish faith, that which is despicable to you, do not do to your fellow. This is the whole Torah, and the rest is commentary. Go and learn it. Okay? Hinduism, one should not behave toward others in a way which is disagreeable to oneself. Buddhism, hurt not others with that which pains yourself. Taoism, regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain, and your neighbor's loss as your own loss. And Confucianism, Su Kong asks, is there a single word which can be a guide to conduct throughout one's life? The master said, it is perhaps the word shu. Do not impose on others what you yourself do not desire. Okay. So you see there's similarities. Now, I want to say that Christianity is unique in that it's proactive. Everybody else is, if you don't want it done to you, don't do it to anybody else. And Jesus is like, hey, if this is how you want to be treated, do it to other people's. Okay? So that's why I think our rule should be called the platinum rule. Okay? Go one step above. But you'll see there's these similarities between religions. Does that mean they're all the same? No. Every religion has exclusive claims. Every religion has differences. And so there are a lot of things that are very similar, but we cannot just glance over the differences between religions. So, how many of y'all have heard the illustration of the blind man and the elephant? One of the most common things. Bunch of blind men trying to describe what an elephant looks like. Okay? And so one grabs the tail and says, the elephant is like a big, thin rope. Another one, grabs the trunk and says, it's like a big snake. No one grabs the ear and says, the elephant is like a big rug. And so one grabs the tusk and says, oh, the elephant is hard and sharp and pointy. He's like a big spear. No one says, wow, look at the elephant. I feel his side. It's like a big brick wall. Okay, and it goes on, but you get the point. The point of it is that, everybody is trying to understand the bigger picture, but they only have a little piece. Okay? Now that sounds beautiful and tolerant, right? Sounds great. Okay? Until you dig deeper. Okay? First of all, the first question you ask with that is, who is telling this story? Okay? Normally, the person telling the story is trying to insinuate that all you other people have got it wrong, but I can see the whole picture. And so, Jesus, Muhammad, Confucius, and all them, they didn't really know what they were talking about. Me, the first-year college student, I understand it all. Okay? And so that is where the whole thing falls apart. Second of all, again, when you start to try to say that all religions are basically the same thing, you disrespect that religion. Okay? If you take away the exclusive claims, the uniqueness of every religion, then you start to just basically say, yeah, that's what you say you believe, but you really don't believe that. This is what's important. And so it's like someone saying, hey, you're a Christian, so you believe in love, right? So just do away with this whole Jesus thing and just focus on love. You're like, Jesus is not optional. You know, the cross and resurrection, it's not optional. And so just like with Hindus are very tolerant of other religions, but they have certain things that they are non-negotiables. Reincarnation. That's their belief system. You know, say that you can believe whatever you believe as long as you believe in reincarnation. And so this is where you start to say that if you start to just boil it all down to just one understanding, it's like you take away the uniqueness of each of these religions. Okay? Now I'm going to put on my pastor hat. There's something else about this illustration that I think people forget. You can say all the things, but what if the elephant turned to you and said, hey, I'm an elephant? You would believe what the elephant said. The Word was made flesh and dwelt amongst us. And Jesus said, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. Okay? So Jesus has revealed himself. And so that's why we follow Jesus. Okay? Take that off. So, how do we relate to other religions? You'll notice up here, one way is what we call pluralism. Okay? And that basically means that everybody is right. Okay? Now, the issue with that is if everybody is right, nobody is wrong. And what if you have contradictory claims? Okay? So, if as Christians we say that Jesus is God in the flesh, and Islam says Jesus is not God in the flesh, how can we both be right? How can we both be wrong? Another thing with Islam and Christianity, Christianity says that Jesus died upon the cross. Islam says he did not die upon the cross. So, which one's right? Okay? So you have these different claims. So, this kind of starts to fall apart. It sounds great until you start to think about it. Okay? The other things, we'll go down here first, is exclusivism. And that is where we say, I'm right, you're wrong. Okay? And I have all the truth and you have no truth whatsoever. So exclusive, X means out, so you're your ex-wife, okay? You exclude certain folks, so that thing. Inclusivism says, hey, we all just come together, okay? We all just, so we're still exclusive, but we're going to say, we'll just throw you in there anyway, okay? And so, yeah, more merrier, come on in. When we talk about Christianity and Judaism next week, we're going to deal more about these things, okay? About the exclusive claims of Christ. Here's the fourth one that I'm going to add, okay? And that is tolerance. And that is, I believe that my system is right, and I'm convinced 100% that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. But you have the right to think what you think. Okay? So I will respect your beliefs. Okay? Why? And we're going to talk about this as we do this study. I'll do my best not to belittle anybody's faith. I will clearly state differences between what I believe and what other religions believe. But I believe that golden rule we just said, do unto others as you have them do unto you. And so I would hate to think of a Hindu sitting here making fun of Christians and saying, can you believe those crazy Christians believe that a man can raise from the dead? I would not want our faith to be belittled like that. And so I will not do that to other faiths. But at the same time, clearly state, this is where we disagree. And this is what this group believes, and this is what we believe, okay? And so we want to have that sense of honesty. Another thing that believes that very popular today is kind of goes with this, but it's called syncretism. Okay? I know I didn't plan out my board very good, so I ran out of room, but syncretism. And basically that means that all religions are like spokes on a wheel. They all start at different places, but at the end, they all go to the same spot. They all go to the middle. So we all have different ways of reaching God. So Christians go through Jesus, Islam goes through Muhammad, whatever religion goes through different things, but in the end, we all end up with God. Okay? And again, that sounds great, but by doing that, it kind of messes up the whole uniqueness of each religion. Okay? And so it takes away the exclusive claims of each religion. So, go back over this. So first of all, do we have any questions about the elephant, different ways of approaching it? Okay. Remember, this is all just setting up for us to discuss the religions. Okay. Now, some other things while we're on here, when we talk about this, how we will go about this. Okay. First of all, I told you that I'm not going to be denigrating any set of beliefs, but I will tell you when I think something's quite crazy. Okay? When we get to Scientology, whoa. Y'all will not look at Tom Cruise the same way. Okay? Trust me. Okay. Another thing is this, that when we talk about Christianity having truth, that does not mean that other religions does not contain aspects of truth. Okay? Remember, all truth is God's truth. So that does not mean that just because the belief system as a whole, we do not say is on the same level of Christianity, it doesn't mean that there's not aspects of it that is true. So like when you read all these things about the golden rule in different religions, we don't say, that Confucius didn't know what he was talking about. You say, well, it sounded a lot like what Jesus said. Oh, okay, well that's different. There's aspects of truth in every religion, okay? And so you can find different aspects of it. And that's why I think it's great when different religions can come together and say, hey, you're against poverty, right? We're against poverty. How can we work together to help feed kids? Okay? We may not be able to worship together, but we can do work together. Okay? And so that's where you look at that stuff. So it contains certain things. To go with that, since it does contain, that means when we look at different religious systems, we don't automatically disagree with everything they say just because. It's kind of like how we get in our political systems. Okay? Isn't it amazing that if you are one side of the political aisle and this guy says this, you automatically disagree with it. Why? Because he said it. Even though 4 years ago you said the same thing. Wait a minute. But that's where we go. So, give it that. Second of all, this is a big one, we also want to make sure that we separate the belief system from the culture it is in. Okay? I've always said that if I were to write a book, one of the books I wanted to write was, is it Jesus or Jesus? And separating Jesus from church culture. I used to live in the Deep South, and there are a lot of things in the Deep South that we said was church that had nothing to do with the Bible or Jesus. Okay? And so, separating that. So, and to give you a good example of this. I had a friend of mine who was a missionary to the Middle East. And he said one of the hardest things he had as being a missionary to the Middle East is trying to tell the people that even though he considered the United States a Christian nation, that not everything that came out of America was Christian. Because when he went to go witness people, they thought Christianity was the devil because they defined Christianity by what they saw coming out of Hollywood. And so they saw Britney Spears dancing in her little outfit and said, so that's what you Christians believe? Like, no, that's not Christianity. But you're a Christian nation. And so that's kind of thing. So we got to be careful to separate those things. And also, I'm going to short time. Let's not define other religions by their worst example. Okay? We love to do that. We love to define ourselves by the very best of us and define them by the very worst of them. Okay? So like when we talk about Islam, if I said, what is your image of Islamic believer? How many of you have an image of a guy with a turban with an AK-47 terrorist? Okay? How would you feel if, when people said, define a Christian, and they mentioned Westboro Baptist Church, and say that's how we define Christianity, by those holding up signs and saying, this is Christian, God hates so-and-so. You're like, no, that's not us. Okay? So this is just all goes down to respects, and it's going to be do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Okay? And as we go through this series, the final thing is we want to make sure that we clarify terms. Because we can say the same words, but it'll mean completely different things. Okay? So like when I say salvation, what does that mean? For some groups, salvation means we are saved from our sins. We go and be with God. Other groups, salvation means you become one with the universe. Salvation for some means you become a God. So even though we use the same word, salvation, it means different things. Even the name Jesus. Okay? People will use the name Jesus. Is Jesus the Son of God, God in the flesh? Or is he just a creation of God and the brother of Satan? There's groups that believe that. So we will make sure we clarify this. Okay. So, now here's the part that I really want to get to. So, why religion in the first place? Why is this desire to have? And so there's basically three views of how religion develops in society. Okay? Let me go over this one. The first one is psychological. And where they say this is that we have that innate feeling of awe of nature around us, of being small. And so there's something within us that longs for something to make us feel safe, to be better, okay? And so this is where we get to feelings of dependence. Friedrich Schleiermacher, hard word to say, he said that we have this feeling of dependence that I understand that my life is dependent upon other things around me, so I need to find an object to be dependent to. So that may be a tree, that may be the God in the sky, that may be the God in the ocean, whatever it is, I am dependent upon that. Okay? Other psychologists took that deeper and said that no, it's not just a feeling of dependence, it is the ideal image of what humanity truly can be. So if you take the best human you can be and multiply him by 100,000, that's God. And so you just take the idealized version. So it's like man, Superman. Okay? And so that's where we go. Now, have y'all ever read Freud, Sigmund Freud? You know, he's crazy, a lot of things. But his thing was, really when people say that they believe in God, They're just trying to fulfill a father figure role in their life. And so they're just trying to say, okay, God is just, my dad wasn't that great, so I'm just trying to think of a good dad to fill that need, okay? And so these have kind of fallen out of favor, okay? The big thing now is what you call evolutionary theory, okay? I'm going to explain what this is and why it's wrong. But this says that basically religion starts off with what we call mana, or mana, okay? And that is just that, and that comes from an Indonesian thing saying that there is a great force around us. You know, like you ever watch Star Wars, the Force?
Yeah.
There's a great force, there's a great thing around us. And so that exists all around us. And so everybody has that awareness that there's something there, there's something moving, there's something bigger than us. Okay? And so, in order to control the mana, you have to use what is known as magic. And that is to manipulate the force, manipulate things, okay? And scholars would say that that magic turns into ritual and to prayer as a way to manipulate that thing, okay? Well, after a while, that force starts to take on personifications. And so that is animism. And so that is where you say, there's not just one big force out there, the tree that I go and I sit under. There's a spirit in the tree. So that's my tree spirit. Or it could be the wind. The wind is a spirit blowing. Or what happens right here is what we call ancestral spirits. And so, great-grandma died, and great-grandma, I prayed to her, because grandma will help me through this. Okay? And so all these spirits exist. So this is where they would say, this is where we get concept of ghosts and all those things. It's just our trying to connect to all that. Well, eventually, those spirits get stronger and stronger to the belief system where they are no longer connected to humans. And they become something far greater. They became a god, lowercase, God. Okay? And so, that's where we get to what we call polytheism. Poly meaning many, theism meaning God. So many gods. And so there's lots of gods out there. A God for everything. God of the sea, God of the wind, God of fire, God of this. There's pantheons of gods. Okay? And so you see how one would go say, we go from this to this to this. And then eventually you come to what is known as henotheism. And what that means is that there may be many gods, but my God is bigger and better than your God. And so I will serve just one God. And so this is where you get to where we believe there's lots of gods, but the God of my tribe is the one I serve. The God of my people is the one I serve. And so you see this in the Old Testament quite often. So, actually, I did not write this down. Anyway, you'll see this where there's different groups who say, you know, the God of the Philistines, the God of so-and-so. And so when you went to battle, it wasn't just a battle between you and these folks. It was a battle between my God and your God. And so remember, like when the Israelites went to battle, what's one of the things they always took with them? The Ark of the Covenant. Okay? And so it was always that thing. So the henotheism says that there's many gods, but I follow one God. He's the best. Well then, henotheism would go into what I call monotheism. Mono meaning one, saying, okay, I now believe there's only one God. The Lord our God is one. Okay? And so, modern day scholars will add another level to this, And that's called beyond religion. And that's say where they get to the point where you realize there is no God, it's just humans, and we just got to depend upon science, okay? And so as you tell, a lot of the folks who hold to this don't really believe in God. Okay. This looks like it makes sense, right? Kind of. But here's the thing. It's never been shown to be accurate. There's no evidence that any culture had ever progressed this way. In fact, what we find is that there is an exact opposite, that it kind of goes the other way. And so, in fact, let me get this right, William Schmidt, he authored a 400-page book called The Origin and Growth of Religion, and he found that in every culture he studied, every culture began not as manna, mana, or all this, but that it kind of started as a monotheistic religion and then evolved into all these other things, okay? And so this leads us to the last one called, well, we'll say it's by revelation, but the term that scholars use is original monotheism, okay? Original monotheism, saying that as a world, we originally started off believing there was one God. And then from understanding that, we just fell apart. Okay? And so, in his book, I mentioned him before, Winfred Cordion, he goes through Genesis 4:26, which says, "Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord." And he said there's 9 things about this that you can see that, get to this. Well, hold on, there it is. 9 keys of man's first religion that you can see. And it says, first, as you study this thing, you see that God is a personal God. He is referred to with masculine grammar qualities. God is believed to live in the sky. He has great knowledge and power. He created the world. God is the author of standards of good and evil, so morals. Human beings are God's creatures, are expected to live by His standards. Human beings have become alien from God by disobeying His standards. Lastly, God has provided a method of overcoming this alienation. Okay? And oftentimes this involves sacrifice. Okay? Now what's interesting about this is that those who have studied ancient cultures, there are aspects of this in almost every form of religion. So here, let me explain it this way. Okay. See my little, cute little thing? Okay, so let's say we have A, B, C, and D. Okay, so A lives here, B lives here, C lives here, D lives here, okay? So keep this in mind. Town A, and here's the story I want you to hear, okay? The farmer went to town to sell his pigs. Okay, so that's going to be actually over there. So, okay? So you see the farmer went to town to sell his pigs. Got it?
Yep.
The next one. The farmer went to town to sell his cows. What's changed? He was had pigs and cows. Okay? Next one, C. The farmer went to the market to sell his cows. Okay, so it's no longer town, market, right? And finally, the farmer went to town to sell his cows. I'm sorry, the rancher went to town to sell his cows. Rancher, okay? So, when we study religion, what we do is we look at, okay, all these cultures have very similar stories, but they're different. But what do they share in common? And so what we find as you study these things, going back to this, is almost every culture believes that God is a personal God. God lives in the sky. God has great knowledge. God created the world. God is the author of good and evil, okay? Human beings were created by God, okay? And then it goes through all these. So almost every culture in their understanding religion has this same understanding, okay? So what scholars will look at that and say, either you believe one story or all of them, but you have to agree that they all shared one common story. So for example, as we start going through these religions, guess what every religion has? A creation story. Guess what else almost every religion has? A flood story. Okay? So how is it that all these cultures, all these religions, very different in different aspects, all share very similar stories? That tells you that something happened, okay? So in every culture we see that you have this understanding that, oh, what happened? Hold on, y'all. Okay, so all these things come to me. So we go to this. Oh, back up. Romans chapter 1, verse 18. Paul talks about the creation of the world. He says, the wrath of being God is revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man, and birds, and animals, and reptiles. So you kind of see how things just kind of started off here, and fell apart. Now, I think I got this. Yeah, here it is. Here's some things. A lot of polytheistic cultures that we know of, when you dig deeper, you start to see that they originally started as monotheistic. So in the book, the Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics, it says that 2,600 years before Christ, cultures in China worshipped Shang-Ti. They understood him to be the creator and lawgiver. He was never to be represented by an idol. And so, but eventually he got replaced by other different gods. Okay? In India, there lived what's called the Santal people, and they found worshiping elements of the world. But however these practices developed, they worshiped a god by the name of Thakur G-I-U. I don't know how you say that. Jai? But he was known as the genuine God who created all things. And they said that he was the one true God. The tribe forsook worshiping him and began entering into spiritism and worshiping other places. In Ethiopia, they had a god they believed that was behind all the other gods, and before all those gods existed, there was a god by the name of Nagano, who was the one omnipotent creator. And in South America, you have Viracocha, who was the Lord, the omnipotent creator of all things. Okay? And so you see that before all these polytheistic and all these ancestral worships and all that, almost every culture looked and said, there's one God. Creator and maker of all things. But then it evolved from that. Okay? So that's why we say original monotheism. That it started off, we worshiped God, but then we broke away. And we started doing our own thing. And so when you see it in this sense, and we're going to study the Jewish faith next week, when you see it this way, it makes sense when you see God showing up to Abraham to reveal himself, and God using Abraham as a means to reintroduce himself to the world. And then it's going to be through the people of Israel that he would take this message, show them, this is who I am. Take this out to the world and share with them who I am. And so we're going to see how that makes more sense, okay? Now, one other thing that, for first let me just ask, is there any questions about this?
Everybody got it.
Got a question? I know a lot of questions, but there's a paper I'm going to recommend that you look up and read. It's by C.S. Lewis. It's called the teaching is called "The Myth Become Fact," but it's part of a series of lectures called "God on the Dock." God on the Dock. On the Dock. D-O-C-K, and he's British, and so what that meant was that on the trial seat. So instead of God judging us, we're one to judge God. And so it's a series of lectures. But in that book, what he talks about was the thing that kept him away from Christianity for the longest time was that there was aspects of the Christian faith in other religions. So there are ancient religions that had beliefs in a God who became flesh. There's aspects of religions where this God came and died. There's where this God came back to life. And he said that, this is just not a nonsense. Everybody's believing crazy things. But then as he studied this, it made sense to him. And I have this written out, but y'all, the way he writes is kind of deep, and I don't want to read it all. But what he basically says was, it would make sense that there would be whispers and hints of what God is doing and what God has done in all creation. And so what he said is that there was whispers of what God was doing and what he's going to be doing. And so the way he put it is that there's different myths, and when he said he doesn't mean it's not true, he said different stories, different beliefs. But he says in Christianity, the myth became fact. God became flesh. It's a historical thing. He walked the earth. He went to the cross. He died for our sins. He rose on the third day. And so he says, this is where you see all these little hints about what all these people talked about. The Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us. And we have beheld his glory, the glory of the one and only God, full of grace and truth. And so one of the things that as we go through this study, I hope that we'll do so, like I said, in a respectful way, but also in a prayerful way. Because as we go through this, you're going to see what people are longing for. They're longing for that connection to God. They're longing for assurance of salvation. They're longing for peace. And so one of the things I see now as a Christian, I say you find that in Jesus Christ. And so one thing as we go through this, I want to say, okay, here's what they're looking for. Here's what we have. And so you see how those needs go. Okay, we're just one a little bit over an hour. Any questions or comments about religion itself? Yes?
What was it called, the myth?
The myth became fact.
Thank you.
Yes.
When you were saying to be tolerant and respectful,
Yes.
and when Christ was on this earth,
Mhm.
he believed that, I don't see it as him being tolerant of other beliefs.
No. And see, this is where, when I say that, to be tolerant, I don't mean to say, you're right, and we're all right. Let's all be right. No, what I mean is that I can say I disagree with you and not kill you.
Oh.
And not, yell and scream and argue. And this is where, my soapbox. This is what we need to learn. How to have adult conversations. Disagree with one another and say, this is what I believe, that's what you believe. Okay? And I'll say, it's so easy to call them rhetoric. Because, I gotta confess, I do. I got mad. I tell you, when I found out that Charlie Kirk got shot, I was mad, I was saying things I shouldn't really have said. So, but it's so easy to get caught up in that. But this is where we need to be the ones to say, okay, this is what I believe, that's what you believe. I'm still gonna love you and treat you like a human, treat you with respect and dignity, regardless of what you believe. Okay? And so that's what I mean. So it's not saying that everybody's right, just saying that you have the right to be wrong. But one thing I will say is that as we go through this, always approach everything with humility. Okay? So have an open, what can we learn from other religions? Okay? For example, one of the things that I respect about Islam that I think that we can learn from is they have the discipline to pray 5 times a day. Some of us, we should go pray 1 time a day. Okay? They go all the way to Mecca. We can't even get to church. And so you want to learn from that. Mormons send their young folks, when they hit 18, they automatically go spend 2 years on the mission field. Hey, do you think we get our kids to say sacrifice 2 years? And I'm going to tell you, my brother is a Mormon, and so their senior year, to prepare for their mission trips, they got to get up before school starts, and they go to their makeshift seminary. And so they got to go to church, and they learn theology. Their church is teaching the theology before school starts. So they got to get to the church around 6 o'clock, and they do like an hour or 2 of lessons. Could you imagine trying to tell, the youth group that's shooting, Nerf guns and pizza parties, saying, okay, come 2 hours in the morning before you go to school, because when you turn 18, you're going to mission field. Like, whoa, we're not doing that. That's where we can learn from other folks. Okay? So, any other questions? Comments? I said this was a lot, okay? But I want you to see that when we start to talk about these, that there's a reason why people want something. They're longing for something. Okay. I know our time's up, but I want to get my soapbox one more time. Okay. These other religions are starting to grow, and Christianity is shrinking. Why? Because Christianity has gotten so wishy-washy about what it is we believe, and people are longing for, give me something to believe in. Wasn't there a song like that? Give me something. There's an 80s song, give me something to believe in. Okay.
I guess I missed that.
You missed that one, okay. So we got to work on movies and songs, okay?
You got
But
an older audience.
I got an older audience. Okay. But the thing is that we want to believe in truth. Tell me, who is God? What has He done? What does the Bible say? Don't tell me that everybody is right, because if everybody's right, then everybody's wrong. Tell me, what should I believe? And then help me to understand why I should believe that. And so that's one thing, for example, Islam is growing so much because it is this is what we believe. Yeah, whereas Christianity for a long time has been, oh, I'm okay, you're okay.
Yeah.
You believe whatever you want, it's good. Whereas we need as Christians say, and you notice now, churches are starting to be more like that, starting to say, we believe in Jesus Christ. That's one thing, okay, soapbox again. The creeds are starting to make a comeback. Where people are saying, what are the creeds of the church? What do we believe? Church is more about me coming in and you telling me how great I am and making me feel all warm and gooey. Who is Jesus? What did He do? Give me theology. Give me beliefs. And where that is happening, the church is starting to explode. College campuses have transitioned from that ooey gooey stuff to now this is what we believe. And it's, boom, you're seeing revivals take place.
Well, Christianity is the only belief that says that God became flesh.
Mm-hmm. Well,
mean, the others
The
don't.
the major religions. Now, there's some other belief systems that said that God became flesh.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's some ancient things, and then a lot of times he would become flesh for just a little bit and do some bad things with people. And that's how we got demigods. So, the story of Hercules is kind of disturbing. All right. Anybody else? Yes.
I think that one of the most profound lessons from today's murder of Charlie Kirk was that he was such a articulate and loving apologist for the Christian faith,
Yes.
drawing campuses everywhere, huge revivals,
Yes.
but always in a respectful and back and forth
Yes.
way. He would engage people, and that was the whole idea. You tell me your questions, and we'll discuss back and forth. And apparently, I heard on one of the stations I was listening to today, that the question he received, he'd already answered one, and the question he had received before, before the shot rang out, was one from an LGBTQ person, and he was going to discuss that. And he never got to say anything because of the shot. But he is a remarkable example of exactly what you're talking about today. You know, be an apologist for the Christian faith, and articulate and knowledgeable, and but at the same time engage other people in the conversation.
Yes. Respectfully. Yeah. That's what we miss. Yeah. It's sad. It's breaks my heart. Okay. All right, guys. So next week we're going to study Judaism and Christianity. Now we're not going to delve too much Christianity because my guess is you're all Christians. Okay, we'll learn about this. But I want you to see what the Jewish faith, the modern Jewish faith, believes. It's like what questions we asked the other day, and I think in our men's group, people ask, well, if Jews, believe in God and they're connected to us, but yet their temple is gone, so how do they get right with God if there's no more sacrifices? And so we're going to look at that and how synagogues came to be and what they believe. So we're going to learn about the Jewish faith and its connection to the Christian faith, okay, and how we would go together, okay? If y'all look around the church, we got pamphlets up where it has a schedule, and I'll print those out and have them next week. So we're going to try to cover the major world religions first, and then we will go, once we get those done, we'll study the New American religious groups, and that's where we're going to talk about the Mormon Church, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Christian Science, and then we're going to get to the cults. And that's where we talk about Scientology and different things like that, okay? So, a lot of room to cover.